You ask your agent a simple question. What's the average order value? It says access denied. Not because you're not allowed, but because nobody told the agent who you are, what data you can see, and what rules to apply to you. That is the reality of AI agents and enterprise data. Powerful, but unpredictable by default. My colleague Pascal has been exploring how to fix that by combining specialized data agents with deterministic workflows using a framework called Agno. In this episode, he'll show us how it works, from a natural language question to an access check to an answer. I am Johnny, and welcome to Technology Explorations at Data Minded. Hi everyone, welcome to Technology Explorations at Data Minded. In this series, we give you an initial look into new or interesting technologies. And today we'll have a look at Agno, a tool that allows you to build workflows to shape your agents and talk to your data. And for this, I've invited Pascal, the CTO of Data Minded. Welcome, Pascal.
Hi, Johnny.
Before we dive in, could you quickly introduce yourself and your role at Data Minded?
Well, as you mentioned, Johnny, my name is Pascal. I'm CTO of Data Minded. That means I'm responsible for the technical vision. I'm also responsible for our products here at Data Minded, right? We have two products. One is Conveyor, which is a data engineering workbench. And on the other side, we have an open source project is called Data Product Portal to start treating data more as a product.
Yeah. And speaking of data as a product, if we extend that to the AI scope today, we see a lot of organizations that want to talk to their data products or talk to their data. And this is also the scope that we will cover today, right?
No, absolutely. And that's actually how I encountered Agno. So if you want to actually enable talking to your data, how do you approach this, right? Do you give an AI agent full access to all your enterprise data? At least I would be very concerned. But this is indeed what we see people do, right? You have Claude running on your local machine. You use MCP to connect to various tables, schemas, semantic models to answer questions. What's an alternative? Basically, you could also, instead of talking directly, to the database, you could also be talking to individualized, specialized agents that know about the data, the underlying data, the rules, the semantics, and everything that's related. Because then I can look at agents more like people with their own skills, with their own speciality. And it also allows them to actually limit your scope. So limit the amount of tools they need access to, limit the amount of knowledge they need to be able to gather. So it creates a little boundary of isolation rather than having one giant intelligent super being. You create multiple smaller intelligent things.
Yeah, you get an assistant for every data product. So you flip the model actually, instead of having this MCP and giving it your personal credentials, you actually give the AI the right credentials, but you need to have permissions to deal with the AI in that case.
Yes, indeed. What happens is, of course, what if you don't have access, right? But there might be an agent that actually knows the answer. And I think this is where workflows come in. It's all about getting deterministic results with workflows. A user might ask any kind of question, and then we could actually figure out what agent can actually answer this question. And then, of course, the next question to ask is, do you actually have access to use this agent or to use the underlying data? And if you have access, the agent can just go ahead and answer that question for you. If he doesn't have access, you can request it. A workflow is really something very deterministic. You write it in Python. It's really do this, then this. It's basically a state machine. And I think it's very good when you have predictable, repeatable, and complex pipeline, right? It's very hard in a skill to express things like conditional things. Like, you have to do this in these circumstances, but if you then reach this condition, you need to do this and this. And, you can have very complex state machines. Skills is for me a handbook. So it describes like how it has to do things. Yes, you can also give it a bunch of tools, but it's up to the LLM to still defer like when to use it, how to use it, and do the kind of thing. The workflow is way more deterministic. You have to go through these steps.
Yeah, it seems you flip the whole skill thing, right? Skills, you have Markdown and then you have a few Python scripts. And here it seems you
Yes.
have this framework and then
Yes.
underneath that you have the agents.
Yeah, absolutely. And for this case, I'm actually using Agno. What you see here, Johnny, is AgnoOS, right? It's part of their commercial version, but you can also use it freely. This thing, it just runs in the browser. You can just sign in. And what you can then do is actually just sign up an agent. So I've already done this. It's the TPP agent, and it just connects to something that's running on my local host, right? It's just a fast API running on my local host. And because it connects there, it basically exposes all the AI agents and workflows that I actually have built in this. And so what I've done is that you'll see here, I have actually 3 data products, and each one of these data products basically have their own specialized agent. Right? I can see here what's their configuration. It has access to a bunch of tools like a SQL database, so it can actually answer questions about the SQL database. It has a system message and so on. And so I could ask here something like, what is the average order size? We took like I modeled a little organization that sells camping gear, and now that agent is going to basically call my agents that are running on my old computer, and it's going to do this. And oh, it says like, I can help you, but it's first checked access. What it's telling me is that I actually don't have access to be able to query this data. So I was wondering, like, if I'm in this real situation, how would I solve this? And instead of like just having a random tool somewhere that can approve this, I would probably model this as a workflow. And that's exactly what I've done. I'll show it first from a user experience, and then I'll show it a little bit from how it actually looks like in code. So what we see here is that a workflow actually consists of multiple steps. When I ask a question, he's going to identify the agent that's probably going to be able to answer my question. He's going to check if I already have access. If I already have access, he's just going to answer it. If I don't have access, he's basically going to look like, am I allowed to grant this person access? In this case, he's just going to say yes, but I've also built like more complex system where basically we're going to submit an access request to an external system, wait for actually sometimes a data owner to actually approve that access, and then you can still come back to this workflow and still later on actually get the answer to this question. So let's ask the same question. What is the average order value? And so when I press this, you'll see actually this workflow get actually kicked off, and it's going to execute step by step. So immediately it identified this is the sales transaction ledger agent. It tells me the reason why it actually chose this one. It's then going to check if I have access. In this case, I didn't have access. Is that's going to see like, can I grant him access? Yes. And so he granted me actually access. And now basically then he's going to answer this question. And then you see here the average order value is 180. It's very easy to build like various different kind of agents.
And so the agent that you asked the question, it's more like a top level agent that distributes tasks to other agents based on some conditions, I understand, right?
It's not even an agent. It's really just a deterministic workflow.
Okay.
It's a deterministic state machine where in each step, agents might be involved. As you see, the first step, it actually uses the identify agent to actually figure out which other agents can answer the question that I have.
Oh, okay, so your top level flow is always deterministic. Those are the steps that you showed
Yeah.
in the right side of the screen. Identify agent is the first one, then checking access, granting access if needed, and answering the questions. And each of these has an implementation, each of these steps.
Yes, indeed.
And so Agno is more like a workflow system that is an orchestrator of agents.
Yeah, so I call it an agent framework. Nowadays, you have so many out there.
Yeah.
And most of these actually allow you to build like AI agents, and most of them also allow you to build workflows. And I think there's always a lot of emphasis on these agents. While I do think workflows are equally important because
Okay.
for some very important cases like granting access, you want determinism. You don't want the AI agent starting to drift or decide by himself like on
Yeah,
some basic
exactly.
rules like what it can do and what it can't do.
Yeah.
It's very easy to build workflows. It has a lot of bells and whistles included. You can have memory evaluations, something I really like. If I want to test something, I can do reliability, and I want to say how reliable or how accurate is actually whatever I'm doing. 180, I think it was, right? You can say like, I want 3 iterations, run evaluation. Okay, I have to give it a name. Now it's going to run that same query over and over again. And it's going to check in whatever the agent responds if we get actually consistent results. So you specify how often you want it to run it because agents are non-deterministic, right? So
Yeah.
this time I'm asking it not to a workflow, I'm asking it to an agent. So that means that once in a while, an agent might be able to give a different result. So we didn't get a full 10 on 10, right? That's actually very cool to see, right? I wasn't expecting this because most of the time when I've run this in the past, I get a 10 on this question.
Okay.
But it's very cool here to see that you get this non-deterministic answer. Now I can look at each individual runs and I can kind of see actually the result was still correct, but because we're using um, AI as a judge, of course, like the evaluation can also decide
Yeah.
there's non-determinism on this thing. So he scored it like 10 in the other two cases, and basically for the evaluation, he scored this one a 9, while it actually still produced the correct result.
Yeah. Okay. So this is the non-determinism in the evaluation part, which is done being an LLM.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. And so these are always things you have to take into consideration when working with agent system.
These agents you also defined yourself, right?
But they're all just living in code. Let me quickly show you like how workflow looks like.
Right.
So a workflow is quite easy, right? You give it a name, you give it a description, and then you basically describe the steps, right? And the step can be an agent. In this case, it just calls the identify agent. I can set a condition, and then he's gonna run a Python function to see, and that's just gonna return true or false to decide can I progress or do I have to stop? And then like if it succeeds, like it's gonna execute these steps. And of course there's like else steps. So in case it would fail, I could also give it an action. And
Yeah.
when all these conditions is done, he's gonna go to this one, to the next one. And that's how it basically decides what to do.
And in this case, identifying an agent is a step, but that's also an agent that does the identification, or how does that work?
Yes, indeed. This is the identify agent. I have specified somewhere which agents are available, what their capabilities are. It gives a brief description of what kind of questions the agent can answer. And basically, it has some instruction to see how it actually has to figure this one out. And then basically, it has an output schema, right? I can say like, I want structured output. I want the agent's log, and I want a reason why you actually chose this one. And this is for me to be able to debug if he does something wrong. You give it a model, and then basically the output of this step is going to be just this agent selection.
And so your workflow can use this because it's structured output to make decisions like you do in your
Huh?
second step.
Yeah. In my case, my next step is the check access evaluator, right?
Yeah.
Which basically for me just checks in a local file that keeps track of which agents every user has access to.
For the sake of the demo, this is sufficient, I think.
Yes.
And so the last agent you have here is the one that answers the query.
Yeah.
Did you need to do something special there as well?
So there's a session state that goes around, right? I could get the step input. The step input just means the input, the original question. The session state decided like which agent was selected to answer the question. So the only thing I do here is like figure out which agent I actually have to call, basically making the call and then I'm streaming it back to my UI, the answer.
And where do you do the database query in this case?
So for each data product, I have a specialized agent. It's actually on the fly that I decide which agent to call.
Okay. So you generate dynamic agents for data products.
I dump a YAML file somewhere. It basically generates me a completely new agent for a data product. If new agents come in, these are added. Each one has like their own credentials to actually log in. They have their own instructions. They have their own description. They have their own name. They have access to OSI files. OSI is Open Semantic Interchange. It's this new standard that is emerging to actually define like your semantic models.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm using that specification to actually describe the semantics of the data.
Yeah, I see.
So these are statically created, but what I'm doing in a workflow on the fly is dynamically decide which agent to call.
And here your agent is essentially fed with information about the data product, how to connect and how to answer questions. So you do have this YAML file describing how the agent should respond and what it should do in this case.
Yeah, there's some generic instruction that I always add, but this kind of gives specialized information about this agent.
Yeah. And seeing this, so you now have your Python file. This reminds me of how Airflow works. You define a DAG in Airflow of tasks. Here you define also a flow, a workflow
Yeah,
with some agent
yeah,
coupling.
yeah.
How does this end up in Agno then? Is this something that's automatically synced, or how do you get it in the UI?
So you create this AgnoOS object. And basically, you give it agent, you give it your workflows. I have enabled tracing to figure out what's going wrong in case things go wrong. This file basically just defines a fast API, which is called app. And then, of course, like if I go into my Docker file, I'm just using Unicorn. So this is running locally. I could just curl this right from here. Uh,
Yeah.
but of course, we all want a beautiful UI, and this is where this goes on, right? I basically say like, I have this agent. This is running on my local machine, so it connects directly from the browser to my Docker containing running on my local
Yeah.
system.
And can you have multiple?
Yes, yes, yes. You see here, I have a workflow agent and I have a DPP agent. Then also from a deployment point of view, it kind of makes sense, right? Because we don't want all these agents being deployed by one Python process. We want to group
Yes.
them in a logical unit for deployment.
And then it makes sense actually to have, when you deploy a data product, also co-deploy an agent in its own container, for example, and make it available in one place, which in this case is AgnoOS.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you register your container in this case in this UI, as you showed. Will it automatically pop up in your chat interface that you have here?
Yeah. Yeah. So it will automatically show all the Asian teams workflows. So here you see if I want to connect a new one, if I have a new container, I just say, I give it a name. You can also put some additional authentication on it. And then basically here, all your different agent OSs just appear here. And then you can select which one you want to use. And within each, you basically expose agent teams or workflows.
So if you would now change the code, rebuild the Docker image and run it, that would be reflected in the UI quite fast, I assume.
I typically have, this task to reset my access, just task down. Um, it's just killing all my containers, one task up. And so basically whenever I change something and I'm back up and running.
Yeah. And then the UI will detect the changes on the fly.
He will first say like,
Yeah.
something went wrong, and then you just refresh and then, everything is green again.
And what I wonder, you have these workflows, they're essentially multiple steps that can take a long time.
Yeah.
What happens if something does take a long time? Like if we would ask approval, let's say we send a Teams message and somebody needs to respond.
So yes, so you have a database attached to it, and it will keep track of the status of your flow, and then you could come back and you can look at your sessions and come back to like a previous session. Now we actually come to the key question: why I chose Agno, right?
Yeah.
I could have built this on Databricks. I could have built it somewhere, but I was wanted to kind of explore with an agent framework, like what I could build myself, and also gain a little bit of a better understanding how all these things actually work behind the scenes. I really like Agno. It's just a Python framework, and it has a lot of good things actually going for it. It actually has excellent documentation. It actually also has an agent on the side, documentation side, that you can ask questions. And there's a lot of things I like about Agno. I've also hit some limitations here and there, which is always good, but like it comes with a lot of batteries included. It has agents, it has teams, it has a lot of tools, access to databases, MCP skills, but also like things like agent to agent communication, evaluations. I love that as well. Like the fact that you can test an agent. In the end, like it really feels like built by engineers. It's all built on Fast API. That's like a very nice feature that I like in here. Something they call callable factories. It just means that to a lot of the parameters of an agent or a team or a workflow, you can just pass a function instead of defining it. And that function will then at runtime be called with the runtime information. And then you can decide at runtime actually which tools you're making available. This is basically to limit your context window, right?
Yeah.
To keep the amount of input tokens as small as possible.
And based on what do you then decide? Is it based on metadata or also on like previous conversation?
You could look at the history if you want to, but basically it is deterministic Python code, right?
Okay.
You could use an agent there as well, but I'm not sure that's going to save you tokens.
No, indeed.
Depending on what your name is, your role, it knows your identity, right? So it could basically query some additional system, ask what your permissions are. Based on those permissions, give you access to these kind of tools.
Indeed, indeed. That was indeed a question I had. You were logged into Agno, I guess. So it gets information about your role and your identity.
It gets information about my identity. That's basically something that's Agno just passing in, right? Because I'm logged into AgnoOS.
Yes. Does Agno then also allow deployment of agents? Like now you built this, you're developing the agent. Suppose you want to give it to me without giving access to Agno. Is there some way to expose the agent as an endpoint or using a UI?
Yes, like it's just a fast API in the end. You get just a fast API object. You can plug any UI you want into that API.
So Pascal, this was a really nice overview of Agno and what it can do. What are your main takeaways after trying this out?
It is indeed new technology, and if I would be looking at a production system and I'm already using Databricks or say Snowflake, I would probably look more into these systems first. Like especially for the talking to your data, I wouldn't like go and hosting my own. They have these things built in, right? What I do find interesting if you want to create like these workflows, right? And then I do think Agno is a very nice framework to use, and I think it's really built with strong engineering principle, and it really comes with batteries included. It still has a little flaws here and there.
Yeah, it was good for me to get a view on what is a workflow and especially how it compares to skills. My take is indeed that workflows are the flip side of skills, where skills are mostly markdown driven and can call some tools. In Python, for example, the workflows are rigid frameworks where you plug in dedicated agents. Is there some code you could make available in our repository?
Yes, it's completely self-contained.
Okay, so we can put that in our public repository. Very
Absolutely.
nice. All right. So Pascal, thanks a lot for this enlightening demo. It was really good to see how Agno works and how workflows work. And so thank you everybody for watching, and give Pascal's code a spin, test out Agno, and get back to us with any questions. And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.